The Empress Returns, by Iowa Forever. Chapter 1.12 The Raven. The throne room was just as cavernous and dark as Celestia had remembered, though the Custodes and Mechanicus adepts had done much to maintain the workings of the throne and the Astronomicon. They still labored in darkness and poor lighting, not helped by the low-lying cloud from incense burners that had filled the throne. Celestia had ordered the incense taken down. The last thing she needed was to smell foul while tending to her work. "I have requested your presence that you might bring a new spark of energy to the Mechanicus," Celestia said as she turned towards her guest, the Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus. "I am honored to be called into your presence," the man said, two mechanical eyes wiring. "But I am uncertain what you mean by new spark of energy." "Quite simply, I do not approve of the direction the Mechanicus has gone since my departure." Divorcing themselves from human emotions had been one of the core tenets of the Mechanicum since its inception. But by the way the Fabricator General shifted, Celestia could tell that he still felt fear. "When the vaults of Terra were opened, all my secrets and research divulged. Why then did you remain as you had been for the last 10,000 years? Innovation is room for corruption without," the Fabricator General replied. "In such turbulent times, it would be ill-advised to allow such threats to ruin the holy works of the Omnissiah." "Yes, but stagnation has gripped the Imperium for far too long, and are the creations I have sanctioned worthy of destroying the foes of mankind?" "Yes, but the Mechanicus does not have many of the facilities too." "I know, why I have drawn up new schematics for the Forge Worlds, in preparation for the Imperium's revival." Celestia turned away, striding back to a workstation she had built. "I also have presented a gift for the Mechanicus, again drawn from notes that you seem to have neglected." This piqued the Fabricator General's interest. Archaeotech at least still held some value to the Mechanicum, even if they appeared reluctant to even try and produce it. Celestia returned to the Fabricator General and handed off the weapon. "It appears to be a standard Godwin bolter," the Fabricator General said, turning the gun over in his hands several times. "Though it feels lighter, somehow. And the magazine is not standard. This was an old prototype I discovered shortly before the invasion of Terra," Celestia said. "Somehow it survived this long, and somehow it was neglected. There were a few components that I was able to replace or remove, so it should be easier to carry for both Astartes and Sororitas forces." Celestia beckoned the Fabricator General to follow her. Next to her workspace were several targets, giant slabs of stone that had been cut for this very purpose. "Go on, fire it." There was a pause as the Fabricator General raised the weapon, lining up the first of the stone pillars in the bolter's sights. The Fabricator General pulled the trigger of the weapon, the roar of the bolter filling the throne room as mass reactive rounds shattered the stone ahead. The Fabricator General released the trigger, inspecting the target ahead for a moment before turning back to Celestia. "Rate of fire has increased substantially," he said. "Though the added recoil might make it more difficult for mobile units to use. As I said, this is merely a prototype." Celestia gave the Fabricator General a smile. "I will be giving you my notes and schematics for your return to Mars. I would like 2,000 of these ready in the next 2 months. At this, the Fabricator General scoffed. "With all due respect, Empress, but even the forges of Mars would take more than 2 months to adjust to produce fully operational models of these weapons, much less produce 2,000 of them. If you follow the plans I have for upgrading the Forge Worlds, you will have no such issues." Celestia gathered a collection of papers and data disks from her workspace. "I wish you a safe journey back to Mars, friend. I hope to see these weapons in the hands of the Imperium's finest soon enough." The Fabricator General said nothing, instead giving a nod of thanks before taking the information from Celestia. Celestia was prepared to turn back to her work when she spotted a custodian stepping out of the darkness, passing the Fabricator General without a word. "Empress," the custodian said, kneeling before continuing. "The young inquisitor who assisted in your return has arrived bearing news." "Please, send him in," Celestia replied. The custodian nodded before rising and retreating back into the darkness. Satisfied, Celestia turned back to her workspace, brushing aside a few errant scraps of paper as the Inquisitor and his entourage approached. Celestia cast a glance over her shoulder as Matthias entered. He looked well, if a bit shaken due to standing before his god once more. To his left was Sister Bianca, the Hospitaller guiding a squirming Angelique towards Celestia. Perhaps that is the news Matthias is concerned about. Celestia waited until Matthias was an acceptable distance in before turning to face him. "It is good to see you again, Matthias." "You honor me, Empress," Matthias replied, kneeling. "Though I come to you now with I'm not exactly sure what is it, to be honest. Angelique's prophecies have always been rather scattered, but you must know what lies within her mind." "The mind is a chest," Angelique whispered. And only the key of light may unlock it. So it is an interpretation of her mind that you seek, Celestia said, stepping forward and kneeling before Angelique. The young psyker shied away for a moment, but stopped once Celestia reached out and cupped the girl's chin with her hand. What is different about this particular prophecy? For a while now she's been talking about a raven. Matthias shook his head. I believe it has something to do with your return, but every time I ask for an explanation she just rambles on. He sees, but does not see, Angelique said. Celestia furrowed her brow slightly as she reached out with her powers, a small part of her soul brushing against the mind of the psyker. Anything more, and the poor girl would probably die. Tell me, Angelique, she said. What do you see? There was a pause, Angelique staring at Celestia like a child would watch their parent. She remained silent for several moments before speaking. I see, she said. I see a world scoured of life yet still breathing. It is within the sun's embrace, but hidden from her sight. The raven is there, and he waits to be brought into the light. Celestia gave a small nod. Who is the raven? She asked. He is cloaked in shadow, but you may know well. Angelique looked off to one side. Send the mare, and she will lead him by the hand. Within Angelique's mind Celestia could see the faint image of a familiar purple unicorn, trotting off into the darkness. Angelique knows more than I thought. Celestia released Angelique, the little psyker drawing back to Bianca as Celestia turned to face Matthias. What do you think, Matthias? She asked. Matthias hesitated for a moment, the Inquisitor shifting on his feet for several moments. I do not think I am the one to offer any opinions, my Empress, he stammered. You are all-knowing, after all, and it would be foolish of me to try and persuade you into some course of action that would prove to be nothing but folly. Long ago I might have agreed with you, but the Imperium cannot be built solely with my power. Any bit of advice, any alternate thought that I might not have realized, any of these might be what stands between our victory over our enemies or the destruction of mankind. Celestia gave Matthias a smile. So by all means, tell me your thoughts on this matter. Think of me now as your teacher, not your Empress. There was a long pause, Matthias looking between Angelique and Celestia for several moments. Well, I do remember Lord Marcos saying that certain cults often use ravens and the like as blasphemous symbols, he started. But given how Angelique speaks of this raven, it does seem more benevolent than an agent of chaos. Sound judgment. Do go on. As for the sun's embrace, I don't know. Matthias scratched his head. I believe she might be referring to Sol itself, but that could mean anything from within the solar system to the edge of the segmentum solar. Celestia nodded as the young Inquisitor continued. And this bit about being scoured but still breathing, I assume you understand what she means? To be honest, no. Under any other circumstances, seeing Matthias' face drop in shock would have been amusing, but then potential threats to the Imperium were not present. But I do believe you are right about the placement of Angelique's prophecy, and that this raven is within the segmentum. But if I may speak freely, Sister Bianca said. There are thousands of worlds in the segmentum. It could take decades to find one person on one specific world. And that is where I believe the second part of Angelique's visions comes in. Celestia beckoned the three over to her workstation as she pulled an extra terminal forward. Tell me, Matthias, has there been a time when you have stood upon a planet's surface, looking out into space, and you have failed to see Sol? There have been times. The Inquisitor said. It is unsettling. What does that have to do with anything? With thousands of stars and planets about, who's to say that one or two may not drift to block where Sol and Terra may reside? Celestia finished keying in a search, a small map of segmentum solar appearing. The terminal word for a moment before a list of names appeared next to the image, the list stopping at close to 200. These are all planets or star forts that do not have direct line of sight to the Sol system. Celestia turned back to Matthias and his group. Angelique, can you find the location of the raven from here? It is scoured or was, once. Angelique muttered. The skies burned, and all will burn, but seasons pass, and slowly the scars are healed, the raven's home unmarked by the signs of treason. Celestia nodded slightly, stepping back to allow Matthias access to the terminal. You understand now? Celestia asked. I think so. There was another pause before a single planet was selected. It was a small world, orbiting a binary system about 2 weeks from Terra. Romana Prime, settled in M.20 as part of the first Terran expansions, but all human settlements were exterminated by forces of the Arch-Traitor during their retreat at the end of the heresy. He sees, and he knows, Angelique chirped. Matthias furrowed his brow as he turned back to Celestia. I fail to see how a world that has been subjected to exterminatus can be considered healed. In the ancient days of Terra, forest fires were welcomed by some species of plant, as it burned away undergrowth and allowed their seeds to sprout and bring forth new life. Celestia looked to Matthias. It is possible that in their rush to flee the wrath of the Imperium, the traitors might not have finished their destruction of Romana Prime, and that some forms of life have flourished in the 15,000 years the world has been neglected. A feral world that is believed to be destroyed would be a good place to hide. Sister Bianca offered. I read that the traitors of Aurelia did much the same. Matthias, Celestia said. I would like you to take your team and search Romana Prime for any sign of Angelique's raven. Stay for as long as you need, but be prepared to return on my command. Of course, Empress, Matthias bowed low before continuing. I promise you that I will not let any threat to the Imperium linger within striking distance of Terra. I do not think it will come to that, but I thank you for your diligence. Matthias nodded and turned to leave, the trio well on their way before Celestia spoke again. Oh, and one more thing, she said. Perhaps it would be best if you brought Terra along with you. When I reached out to Angelique, I sensed that she saw a connection between my student and this raven. So Matthias started. You think that Terra is the mare? Celestia nodded before Matthias spoke again. It seems odd, I know she grew up on an agri world, but she does not strike me as an equestrian. Celestia fought hard to bite back her laughter. There are many symbols whose meaning is not apparent at first, she said finally. Go, be on your way. Report to me once you arrive on Romana Prime, and please keep Terra safe. When they had first left, Twilight had been overjoyed to be back on the Sanguinium Martyrs. It was still cold, dark, and cramped, but at least the air was fresher than Terra and she could get away from the crowds of the Imperial Palace. Naomi's sisters seemed relieved as well, though it was hard to tell as once again the others were doing a masterful job at hiding their thoughts and emotions. Most of them, anyway. So there we were, in the middle of the night, Judith said, leaning towards Nikolai and Alexis. It was daytime. Droned Ruth from her spot next to Judith. We were surrounded on all sides by bloodthirsters. They were bloodletters. Dozens of them. Judith jumped to her feet, the two Valhallans pulling back out of surprise more than anything. Only 8. With the utmost calm, I took up Drago's sword, charged towards the demons with the Emperor at my side, and Judith slammed her hands on the table. With one stroke for each, I smote the bloodthirsters and saved the shrine world, and the Emperor's light never left me after that. She's been having this same dream since we were children, Ruth said as Judith sat down. She thinks that it's a sign of greatness instead of some bizarre fantasy. Our most honored saints had many dreams of greatness before their ascendancy. Judith offered. They did not dream that the Grey Knights offered up one of their relics to a random battle sister to do their work for them. Ruth countered. I thought it was a good dream, Alexis said. I'm sure we all dream of destroying all the foes of the Imperium on our own. He smiled. I've had a few myself, actually. Most of which could be considered heretical at certain points. Nikolai muttered, causing Alexis to pale. Hey, this has nothing to do with that governor's mistress. The Valhallan cried, drawing the attention of all the sisters in the room save Naomi. Your Inquisitor brings with him some interesting henchmen. The Sister Superior said to Twilight. I guess Twilight shrugged. But he's not my Inquisitor, I don't really command Matthias to do anything, and he hasn't asked me to. Most likely because he is unaware that he must do anything of the sort. Naomi replied. Your word must be second only to the Empress, yet you still are spoken to as if you were a common guardsman. I have no disrespect for the guard, but you deserve better recognition. I don't mind, though. Twilight gave Naomi a smile. I didn't come here to be worshipped, just to help everyone as best I can. It was impossible to see Naomi's exact expression behind her helmet, but Twilight had spent enough time around the sisters to tell when she was in a harsh mood and when she was not. Fortunately, this was not one of those times. I trust you know what you are doing, Lady Terra. By your leave, I need to make sure our supplies are ready. Oh, okay. Twilight gave a short nod as Naomi departed. There was a pause after the Sister Superior left the room before Veronica laid a hand on Twilight's shoulder. Do not worry about Naomi, Terra, Veronica said. Remember what we have been teaching you? I know that you revere those that have seen the Empress directly, Twilight said, turning to face Veronica. But I'm still Terra, I don't need any special treatment from anybody. But that does not change the fact that you are the student of the Empress. Veronica pointed out. Some might not know you well, and would not know what to say to avoid offending you or the Empress. It would be troubling for most. Twilight shivered. Even the sisters seemed paranoid about the slightest chance at angering their ruler. How can anyone live in constant fear of those who only want to help them? She had little time to say more before Matthias stepped into the mess hall, Angelique and Sister Bianca following him. "Listen up," he said, loud enough to catch the others' attention. "We have just entered orbit around Romana Prime. Magos Errol has prepared the lander for transport, and with luck we should be planetside by dawn." "What will be expecting us down there?" Nikolai asked. "Unknown," Matthias replied. "We have not had time to perform a full survey of the planet, so stay alert and keep rebreathers on you at all times. Fortunately, with the sisters attached to Terra we have a little more flexibility in our search patterns." "Wait, and the Raven will fly to his perch," Angelique said, rocking back and forth on her feet before Bianca steadied her. "With all due respect, my lord," Ruth started. "Do we have to bring the W-Psyker along with us? She does not appear to be the most stable of individuals." "Angelique will not endanger our mission as long as I am here to watch her, sister," Bianca said. "The little Psyker may wander, but she never flees companionship." "I'm sure, but I would feel a little more comfortable without the Psyker around." The sister shook her head. "There's just too much that can go wrong due to their powers." "You know I'm a Psyker too, right?" Twilight asked. At this, Ruth's face paled to almost pure white. There's nothing wrong with that," she added. "Psykers touched by the Empress are blessed. I'm just a lowly sister, so what would I know? Angelique is a wonderful addition to our mission, and I'm sure my other sisters would agree with me." Rebecca, Judith, and Veronica gave quick nods as Ruth buried her face in her arms. "Guess I'm not going to be smote alone," Alexis mused. There was a pause before Matthias continued to speak. "Anyway, we will be sticking close to what I believe are the ruins of the old settlements. If this Raven fellow is benevolent, then there's a possibility that he or she will be drawn towards our search parties and would be willing to return with us." "And if they aren't?" Rebecca asked. "My team, you sisters, and Terra should be enough to hold them off long enough for us to make our escape. If reinforcements are necessary, I still have a direct line to Terra." Matthias turned to leave, Alexis and Nikolai rising to follow him. "The lander should be ready by the time you reach the hangar. We will be waiting for you." Twilight gave a small nod as Matthias and his entourage disappeared. There was a lengthy pause as Twilight looked to the other sisters, Ruth finally deciding to pull her head from her arms. "Well, I suppose we should start heading out," Twilight said. "I'm sure Sister Naomi will want you all ready as soon as possible." "Of course," Rebecca replied before turning towards Ruth. "Ruth? Have you come to terms with Lady Terra's abilities?" "Yes," the sister replied. "I'm sorry for my restrictive knowledge. Most Psykers that I have encountered during my life have been actively trying to kill me at some point or another. It is enough to make one wary of contact with another." "Well, we've gotten along well enough," Twilight offered the sister a smile. "I think that's got to count for something, right? And she's not actively trying to kill you, so you can take heart in that," Sister Judith said, earning a glare from Veronica and Rebecca. "Of course." Ruth rose to her feet, dusting of her armor before continuing. "We'd best not keep the Inquisitor and Sister Naomi waiting." "Right." Twilight nodded, starting towards the door as the four sisters formed up alongside her. They walked in silence, accompanied only by the sound of their boots against the metal floor, and would have continued in silence had Judith not spoken up. "So, what has the Empress taught you?" she asked. "Taught me?" Twilight replied. "About being a Psyker and all. The only Psykers we've seen are dead ones, and none of them were ever trained by the God Empress." So Judith leaned in a bit closer. "Can you blow up demons with your mind? Or cleanse rot and corruption with a word?" "Judith, you know better than to inquire into such powers," Rebecca said. "But she was trained by the Empress," Judith countered. "It's not heresy if it is based in holy understanding." Rebecca merely shrugged as Judith turned her attention back to Terra. "So, what can you do?" Nothing like you described," Twilight said. I can make shields." "Ooh," Judith's eyes widened. "I think I saw a librarian do that once. I think it's kind of fuzzy." "We've never fought alongside the Astartes before, Judith," Veronica said. "You must be remembering things differently." "I'm pretty sure we did at some point." Judith started before Ruth cut her off. "Shields?" she asked. Twilight gave a small nod as the sister looked away. "I suppose there is nothing wrong with shields. I'll need to speak to Sister Naomi about it, though. She might not appreciate you performing acts of witchcraft in a combat situation." "It's not witchcraft if it's holy," Judith said. The others ignored her as they turned down the hall towards the hangar, though Twilight could sense that they were coming to terms with the sisters' claims. "I can always ask Celestia if she could give them an audience and talk about magic," she thought. It's better than living in ignorance all the time. The walk to the hangar was a familiar one, Twilight no longer daunted by the massive room as she and the sisters stepped in. Naomi was there, speaking with Matthias while the Inquisitor's henchman assisted Magosarol with final preparations. Twilight gave a small shiver as she cast her gaze over the tech priest. While artificial limbs were not unheard of in Equestria, no one she knew had willingly amputated the lower half of their body for mechanical spider legs and replaced part of their spine with what she hoped was just an extra pair of arms. The red robes that covered Magosarol's body did not help matters, as they shrouded most of his non-mechanical parts to make it harder to decide where the machine ended and the man began. "I think we're ready," Twilight said, catching Naomi and Matthias' attention. "Good," Naomi said, looking to the other sisters. "Check your weapons before we depart." The sisters nodded and moved as one towards the stack of supplies while Naomi turned her attention to Twilight. "Are you sure you are capable of assisting us on this mission?" "Of course," Twilight nodded. "I've had to find other people before, I think I'm more than capable of helping you find one more." "We'll see," Matthias replied. "If Angelique's prophecies hold true, your presence might be more than enough to draw the Raven out. If not, it could be here for months before we find anything." "But we can always call for more help, right?" Twilight offered. "True, but I think the Imperium needs its resources elsewhere at the moment." Twilight chewed her lip. The Inquisitor was right, again, this was not Equestria, where lost ponies had the assurance that a large search party would be looking for them. The Imperium had its own concerns, and what were theirs compared to the plight of a whole galaxy? Idealist Twilight would have to wait for some other time to shine. Now was a time for realistic goals. "Where's Frederick?" Twilight was jolted from her thoughts by Judith's cry. The sister had rifled through the various supplies they had gathered, panic taking over her. "He's not supposed to leave me like this." "Judith," Naomi brought her hand to her forehead. "What have I told you about naming your weapons?" "I spoke with a tech priest, he said it would not be heretical as long as the machine spirit had no objections, and it didn't." Judith spun around. "I can't find him. We need Frederick, or else we'll be ambushed and overrun." Twilight started. "Is there something I should know?" "It's a silly thing, really," Naomi replied before turning her full attention to Judith. "Have you actually considered opening one of the storage boxes?" "Why? We don't store bolters away like foodstuffs." "A heavy flamer is much different than a bolter, Judith," Rebecca offered. "Maybe you should check, just to set your mind at ease?" Judith paused for a moment, then nodded before moving towards a larger box. Twilight watched as the sister knelt and opened the box, her face instantly lightening up as she beheld its contents. "There you are," she said, hefting a truly massive weapon out of the box. The thing was almost as big as Judith herself, painted red save for a white skull and crossbones on the side. Unlike the bolt weapons, which ended in a little stub of a barrel, the heavy flamer extended further into a pair of holy tubes, to vent heat, Twilight guessed. Judith examined the weapon for a moment before pulling it to her chest. "Oh, don't worry, Mama's got you now, and she's not going to let go anytime soon." "A holy weapon older than she is, and she treats it like a child," Naomi muttered. "I swear, the Empress must have a good sense of humor to keep testing me like this." "This isn't going to be a problem, is it?" Matthias asked. "The last thing I want is for accusations of heresy to start welling up." "Judith is eccentric, but she's a good soldier," Naomi replied. "Keep her in my sights, and I'll keep her under control." "You don't always have to treat her like a weapon, you know," Twilight said, both the sister superior and the Inquisitor looking to her. "Just let her be Judith now and again, and she'll be more than happy to help you when the time comes." Matthias blinked in surprise a few times, and though it was impossible to read Naomi's expression through her helmet, Twilight guessed it was more of the same. Instinct told her to back down, but Twilight found herself standing firm. "I suppose you bring up a valid point," Matthias started. "But that is a matter for another time. We need to get down on Romana Prime before the Raven goes into hiding again." Sister Naomi gave a short nod and moved to her fellows, calling out orders while Matthias turned back to his companions. That would leave Twilight alone, but for now she was content to just observe her fellows. Maybe this way, she could find a way for them to break out of soldier mode, even if only for a brief moment. The airlock hissed as Matthias and the others got their first clear look at Romana Prime. It was surprisingly sparse, with a light scattering of thin pines across the landscape. It lacked the heavy noise from more vegetated worlds he had set foot on, but as many of them were death worlds in one way or another, he was happy for the silence for now. As the ramp lowered, the sororitas rushed forward, forming a perimeter around the lander while Matthias, Tara, and the others formed up. Judith and Naomi took center, the pilot lights to their flame weapons flickering as they stepped forward, while the other three fanned out to sweep the brush with their bolt guns. There was a long pause before Naomi lowered her weapon. All clear. Angelique? Matthias said, stepping aside so Angelique and Sister Bianca could step forward. The psyker paused for a moment, drumming her fingers against the rebreather that she had been given. She swayed about for a moment before turning back to Matthias, coking her head to one side. The raven makes his nest among these trees, she said. Search for him, for he is both high and low. Well, so much for a clear answer, Alexis said, his voice muffled by his helmet. What now, Lord Matthias? We'll need to split up, Matthias said, coming down to the ground. Groups of 2, though Terra should stay close to Sister Bianca and Angelique. Alexis, Nikolai, stay here and guard the camp, we should be back before nightfall. Yes, Lord Matthias, Nikolai said, nodding to Alexis as the two formed up at the bottom of the ramp. Terra followed after them, swaying slightly with each step she took. How can you wear these helmets? She asked, tugging at the stormtrooper helmet that Matthias had provided her. You can't see a thing in them. Not all of us are blessed with the systems available to the Astartes. Matthias replied. Stay close to Angelique, and I'm sure you'll be fine. Sure. Terra nodded, her helmet shifting forward much further than it would have had it fit her. Matthias turned away from Terra, approaching Sister Naomi as she gave her own instruction to her sororitas. There are no objections if you accompany me, sister? He asked, drawing Naomi's attention. None at all, Lord Matthias. The woman replied. My sisters have their orders, though I would have preferred that one of them keep an eye on the Empress student. Sister Bianca will take care of her, Matthias assured her. And if all else fails, we still have Vox casters, do we not? I suppose. The sister's body language said otherwise, but Matthias was not interested in dragging this conversation out further. Come, we have your psyker's raven to find. Matthias nodded, and with that the groups departed. Matthias and Naomi took a more northern route, skirting along the edge of the forest before ducking into one of the thicker patches of underbrush. You are protective of the Empress student? Matthias asked once he was certain that they were alone. Why would I not be? Naomi replied. She is the blessed student of the Holy God Empress. To not be protective of her is to invite disaster upon the Imperium. The sororitas looked to Matthias. And are you not? Protectiveness can be shown in different ways than acting as a bodyguard, sister. Matthias replied, pushing aside a few errant branches to allow Naomi forward. I apologize if not all of us feel the need to act in that shadows like you inquisitors. Naomi started, her voice surprisingly harsh. I cannot say I care for your kind all that much. And yet you listened to Marcos when he asked for your presence. I was ordered by my superiors to assist an inquisitor in his mission, nothing more. Naomi pressed on. I serve the Imperium, my order, and my Empress. To serve any other would be a most grievous treason. You say that you see no need to act in the shadows, Matthias started. But answer me this, why do you feel the need to hide behind your helmet? Naomi froze, the grip around her combi flamer's handle tightening. You know not of what you speak, Inquisitor. The sororitas growled. I requisitioned your personnel files when we departed Terra, a little light reading so that I would know who I am serving alongside. Matthias moved so he was alongside Naomi. And I must say your record both impresses me and confuses me. You have served in many notable campaigns, including the Second Graya Uprising, yet not only have you refused recognition for your actions, you have also refused direct orders to be transferred to training units. The Imperium needs soldiers, Naomi countered. I am willing to lay down my life for my people, why would they deny me that chance? Even Space Marines know when the time is needed to train the next generation, Matthias said. If I were anyone else, I would say you were hoping that you would die anonymously on one of those battlefields. And then there's the matter of your helmet and what lies beneath. Naomi's hands were trembling now. Please, for your sake, Naomi said. I would like to continue our search. I know. Matthias backed off as Naomi continued walking. But there is no shame in what happened, it was beyond your control. And that is where you are wrong, Inquisitor. Naomi stormed off, trampling a few small saplings underfoot as she walked. Matthias waited a few moments until he was certain there was enough foliage between him and the Sister Superior to absorb bolter fire, continuing at a slower pace to check whatever his partner had missed. He knew the sisters would mean well, but keeping a closer eye on Terra would not be ill-advised. What do you see, Lady Terra? Bianca called from behind Twilight. Twilight gave a small swallow as she leaned over the ledge, her hands wrapped around a nearby tree as she peered over. I see, she started. Well, it's a ravine, a pretty big one too. I think I see some caves a little farther down. Bats wait in caves, Angelique chirped. Their corpses lie broken by the greatest of mankind. Thank you, Angelique. Twilight replied, pulling away from the ledge and hurrying back to the others. So, do you think the raven might be hiding down there or something? It is worth reporting to Lord Matthias, Bianca said. We will have to do a full sweep of the caves tomorrow, though, we are drawing close to evening and I do not feel we would be properly armed for a full search. Send the mare, and she will return, Angelique said. The raven is watching, and will wait for the door to be opened. Twilight gave a small smile. As odd as some of Angelique's predictions were, they had become endearing the more she heard them. Maybe I can reach out to her like Princess Celestia did, she thought. It might help her be a little more coherent. Well, we'll just have to provide a door for him to open, won't we? Twilight replied. Angelique gave a giggle, dancing about in place while Bianca and Twilight looked on. I thank you, Lady Terra, she said. Tending to Angelique can be tiring, but with your help and the Empress' blessing she has become much more manageable. Oh, you're welcome. Twilight smiled. That smile faded as she saw something. She was not sure what, but something in the trees had shifted, ever so slightly. Even when watching it, she was uncertain if she had actually seen it, but a small part of her mind confirmed otherwise. Bianca noticed Twilight's shift in expression and frowned. Is something wrong, Lady Terra? She asked. Twilight replied, snapping her vision back to Bianca. No, I just thought out of the corner of her eye she saw another shift in the foliage. That I just thought I saw something. What? Bianca looked around. I see nothing, just trees. Really? Twilight asked, looking around again. The forest was still, save for a wind blowing in from the north. But as she watched, Twilight once more saw a shift in the air, ever so slightly, closer to the ravine below. If it's okay with you, I'm going to try and find a way down into the ravine for later, you know? Would you like me to come with you? No, Twilight cried, perhaps a bit too loudly. Angelique cocked her head to one side as Twilight stammered out an expression. I mean, you have to stay here with Angelique, right? I can just go on ahead for a little, right? Bianca did not seem convinced, but she did give Twilight a knowing sigh. Very well. I will wait here then, but remember to alert us if you are attacked. Twilight nodded, turning and wandering off towards where she had seen whatever it was. She pushed aside a few low-lying branches, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. Nothing. Whatever it was, it would have given Pinky a run for her money when it came to hiding. Hello? Twilight asked, continuing on towards the edge of the ravine. Ahead, she could see a small path carved from the rock, all but invisible to the naked eye. There was still no movement, but something within Twilight told her to move on. Is someone there? No answer. Of course, if someone wanted to say hidden, why answer the blundering mare asking where they were? Twilight ventured onward, ferns brushing against her legs as she made her way toward the path ahead. It was overgrown, sure enough, and some of the stones looked ready to fall, but with enough patience she could get down without falling. Twilight hesitated for the briefest of moments, her hand brushing against the hilt of her sword. This was a new universe. She needed to be a little more daring. Leave, now. Twilight yelped and spun, but the source of the voice was nowhere to be found. Quickly she drew her sword, the armor-sundering power field wrapping around it as she held it. Who's there? She called. Please, I don't want to fight you. Neither do I. The voice said. Twilight turned about, but found no one. It was as if the voice was coming from all directions at once, whoever it was that was speaking slowly circling her. Leave. Gather your companions and never return to this world. Why? Twilight lowered her sword. Please, tell me who you are. But the voice had fallen silent. Twilight turned again, but there was no sign that anyone had been near her, not even a disturbed leaf. She hesitated for several moments before putting her sword away, the energy field winking out as she turned back to where Angelique and Sister Bianca were waiting. That did not take very long, Sister Bianca said. What did you find? Twilight hesitated. Sister Bianca was a caring woman, no doubt, but she could also report anything and everything to Matthias. While she did like the Inquisitor, drawing more people into a situation that could get them hurt was the last thing Twilight wanted on her mind. Nothing, really, she said. But I did find a path leading down to the ravine. We can let Matthias know when we search tomorrow. I see. Bianca nodded. Well, we best head back to the ship now. Twilight nodded, falling in place next to Bianca while Angelique skipped on ahead. There was a lengthy pause, the three women walking in silence broken only by Angelique's odd humming. Sister Bianca, Twilight said, catching the Hospitaler's attention. How did you end up working with Matthias? He needed my help, Bianca replied. His previous Medicae had been lost to a rogue Kroot warband, and Angelique's lucidity was in jeopardy. I had some experience treating psychers during my years as a Hospitaler, so he brought me aboard to care for the girl. Oh, Twilight looked ahead to where Angelique had stopped to examine a flower. But it doesn't really seem like you, all this sneaking around and hunting aliens and monsters and the like. The Imperium calls us to take many roles for the benefit of mankind. Bianca countered. I am a healer, first and foremost. My duty is to bring relief to the sick, comfort to the dying, and guidance to the lost. If asked, I could take up a bolter and fight as I did before I became a Hospitaler, but for now the Inquisitor and the Empress require more gentle skills. So, you were like Naomi and her sisters? Twilight asked. Once. I was a daughter of the Argent Shroud, as proud a sister as ever. I fought well against the enemies of the Imperium, but I wept whenever I saw the conditions that the faithful were left in once we had to move on. So, when I was barely older than you, I approached my canoness and took up the vows of a Hospitaler. Sister Bianca closed her eyes. 62 years of service, so many broken and lost, and I do not regret it in the slightest. You're 84? Twilight cried, immediately backpedaling once she realized what she had done. I didn't mean to sound disrespectful, but I just thought, well, you don't seem old? Bianca finished for her. Twilight gave a sheepish nod before the sister chuckled. I suppose it is different where you come from. In most of the Imperium, those my age still have quite a while before they can be considered old. The rejuvenation procedures the Inquisition provides are an added bonus, I suppose. Twilight gave another nod as Bianca continued. But I take it this line of questions is not centered around my age, is it? Well, not really. Twilight started. Has there ever been a time where you've wanted to help someone, but they refused your help? Or Matthias told you not to? There was a lengthy pause, Bianca looking ahead at Angelique. The young psyker had resumed her walk, a small bouquet of flowers in her hand. Yes, there has, she said, her voice soft. Those memories haunt me from time to time, but my faith is enough to keep me from dwelling on them. Bianca looked to Twilight. It may be the same for you. When faced with the impossible choices in life, faith may be the only light to guide you. Twilight fell silent, looking on ahead to keep an eye on Angelique. Whoever had spoken to her might have been Angelique's raven, but what good would it do anyone if they could not help whoever it was? Maybe now, Twilight needed faith more than anything. Lady Tara is hiding something. Matthias looked over to where Sister Bianca was standing. The teams had ventured down into the ravine the Hospitaler and Tara had discovered, Naomi's sisters forming up with the student before venturing in while Matthias, Bianca, and Angelique covered the entrances. I figured as much, Matthias said. What is she hiding? I am uncertain as to that. Bianca replied. But when we discovered the ravine, she asked for a moment to scout ahead alone to discover a way down the ravine. From the nervous way she carried herself, and from the questions she asked me on our way back, I felt that there was more than just the ravine on her mind. You think she found something that might relate to Angelique's raven? The mare walks in the night, Angelique sang. Only then will the raven be let in from the cold. That is my only thought. Bianca frowned. But I do not understand why she would withhold this information. We are all working towards the same goal, are we not? Yes, but there is always a possibility that she does not fully trust us yet. Matthias looked back down into the ravine. I figured as much when she and the Empress first arrived. Really? I haven't brought it up because it is not but frivolous conjecture at this point, but the point remains that young Tara has not been completely honest about her identity. She was born and raised on a small agri-world, if I remember correctly, Bianca said. She lived as a codicil for several years before being called into the Empress service. And yet when she is alone with the Empress, the two speak a dialect unknown to most scholars in the Imperium. Matthias turned towards Bianca. It took me most of our trip to Terra to even find a scholar who knew of it, and it took him even more time to determine that dialect died out centuries ago when the planet of origin was destroyed by the Necron world Borsis during the Vidar campaign. Now how would a young codicil become fluent in a language that has been dead since before the Emperor awoke from the Golden Throne? The Empress taught her? Bianca offered. Most likely, but why? Matthias looked back to the ravine. What is it that young woman is hiding from us? I don't believe it truly matters, Bianca said. You say she speaks it only when in the presence of the Empress, correct? What business do we have in inquiring into the secrets of Her Holiness and her favorite student? Matthias had no answer to this. Of course, it was silly of him to be suspicious of the Empress. She was the ruler of mankind, the god of order who stood against the tide of chaos and destruction. But inquisitorial training taught him to always have suspicions. Could he so easily give up that training for one girl? Matthias was shaken from his thoughts by the sound of the sisters and Tara returning. "There's nothing down here," Tara called up. "Are you certain of this?" Matthias asked. "We found the skeletons of a few creatures, but they had rotted months ago," Naomi replied. "If there was something hiding in these caves, it has since moved on." Matthias gave a small snort of disappointment. Yes, they had only been searching for a few days now, but time was a resource the Imperium did not have much of, and this hunt for a raven was taxing that much further than he had hoped. Matthias' gaze drifted towards Tara. "And what is your role in this, that you would make Bianca of all people suspicious?" "All right then," he said. "We'll extend our search to the south tomorrow." Sisters Rebecca and Veronica spotted a few disturbances in the land that might be sign of habitation. "For now, return to your usual search patterns, and alert me to any chances." The sisters and Tara nodded, falling into single file as they made their way up the path back to Matthias and Bianca. As they waited for the search party to return, Matthias turned back to Bianca. "I think it would be best if we keep these concerns to ourselves for now," he said. "If any other problems arise, we may always speak to the Empress about our concerns." "Of course, Lord Matthias." Sneaking out was something Twilight never did well, rarely did. There had been a few incidents when she had followed her brother and Cadence on their dates, but that was mere childish curiosity. This, now, was something far greater. She had foregone her armor, taking only her sword and helmet. She had considered taking some food if she stayed out longer than anticipated, but the presence of sisters Veronica and Bianca sharing a cup of tea in the galley had ended that thought quickly. Once she was certain she had everything she needed, she slipped through the airlock and out into the night of Romana Prime. "Stupid helmet," she muttered as she reached the edge of the forest. "Why can't I just get rid of the thing?" A crazy idea entered her head, all logic flowing away to nothingness. Taking a deep breath, Twilight unfastened her helmet and pulled it from her head, exhaling only when she could hold her breath no longer. Nothing happened. She did not start choking, she did not feel lightheaded, and she was not dead. The air was perhaps the freshest she had breathed since she left Ponyville all those days ago. "Guess I can tell Matthias when he comes looking for me." Twilight set her helmet down on the ground and continued on, taking the path she, Bianca, and Angelique had taken on their first day of searching. With no man-made lights and little cloud cover, the sky above was filled with a multitude of stars. Twilight stopped briefly, looking up to the sky and tracing whatever lines between the stars she could see. She turned, searching for the yellow dot that would signify Tara's sun, but frowned as she failed to locate it. "There must be something in the way, I can always look for it later." Twilight continued on, using as much of the starlight to illuminate her path. The shadows of the forest prevailed, though, and Twilight stopped herself before she became too lost. Silently she raised her hand, a small purple and white flame forming in her palm and illuminating the area around her. "Interesting trick," the voice from earlier said. Twilight turned again, but once more did not see the source. "If you show yourself, I might tell you where I learned it," she replied. "Please, I only want to talk." There was a lengthy pause, the voice having fallen silent once more. Then the air before Twilight shimmered, and she got her first look at her mysterious companion. He was a giant by anyone's standards, close to twice as tall as Twilight. His skin was pale, his hair dark and tangled from neglect. He wore only a tattered black robe around his waist, and his chest was crisscrossed with a multitude of scars. His eyes were dark and impossibly deep, Twilight shying away from staring at them for too long. "I have already done too much for you," the giant said. "Leave now." "Why?" Twilight asked. "Why are you so insistent that I leave, yet you still follow me whenever I or my friends venture out?" The man had no answer, instead fixing Twilight with an unblinking stare. "We're searching for someone here, is that you?" There was another pause, the man barely moving as he watched Twilight. "It is not safe here," he said finally. "Follow me." With that the man brushed past Twilight, who quickened her pace in order to keep up with him. For his size he was incredibly nimble, ducking through branches and trees without even disturbing a twig, and even with his skin so pale Twilight almost lost him in the night several times. Given how secretive the man was being, he probably would not have minded. Once again Twilight found herself heading back down the ravine, the giant having slipped into the nearest cave. The flame in her hand flickered slightly as she entered the cave, pausing only to adjust her eyes and keep track of the man as he went further in. Ahead, Twilight could see a faint glow from what she guessed was a fire, and as she drew close she snuffed the psychic flames in her hand once they were no longer needed. The man had set up a campfire in the center of one of the larger openings in the cave. He had his back to her, as if he were trying to ignore her, and on the opposite side of the camp rested a pile of black and silver armor, adorned by white engravings of ravens and raven wings. "So this is Angelique's raven. I don't know who you are," he said as Twilight moved around to find a seat. "And I would rather you do not remain." "But you're all alone out here," Twilight said, finding a suitably sized rock to sit on. "It's not good for anyone to be alone like this." "You are naive to think so, girl," the man replied, turning his head to gaze into the fire. There was a pause before Twilight spoke again. "My name is Tara," she said. "What's yours?" The man looked up at her, Twilight remaining resolute even if his gaze reeked of disdain. "My name matters not," he said, looking away once more. "Tell me, though, why you seem so resolute in speaking with me, and why you refuse to leave." "I could ask the same thing as to why you're so adamant in remaining alone," Twilight replied. "But since you asked, I think I'm supposed to find you." The man looked up at Twilight, one eyebrow raised. "I know it sounds crazy, but one of my friends had a vision about someone she called a raven, and that he would come and assist the galaxy in its hour of need or something. She's not very coherent. From my observations, I can understand. Anyway, I saw your armor is adored with ravens, so maybe this raven she keeps talking about is you." There was a pause. "I know that's a horrible explanation, but you're the only human I've seen on this planet, and that's where she said the raven would be." "Human," the man mused. "Your generalization is endearing, young Tara, but I would not consider myself among those fortunate to have true humanity." Twilight opened her mouth to say something, but the words died before they could truly form. She shuffled in her seat for a moment, watching the man as he continued to try to ignore her. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Who are you hiding from?" "I do not have to answer that question," the man said, pulling himself up straighter to peer at Twilight over the flames. "I know, but it's something to talk about, and it's only fair since I already told you why I'm here." Twilight furrowed her brow. "I know your armor is power armor, like the Space Marines everyone keeps telling me about. Where? Are you one of them?" There was a pause before the man looked back to the fire. "I was far greater than any of the Astartes now living," he said. "I was their commander, a general in dark times when humanity's fate hung in the balance. I commanded legions of soldiers, struck terror in the hearts of the most resolute Xenos, and was praised as a savior by many of mankind." The man chuckled. "What a fool I was, thinking that I could take on the task my father had spoken of. Maybe it was desperation, but I destroyed which I fought for, and what kind of man can serve with a clear conscience while the consequences of his actions lay revealed for all to see?" Twilight watched the man as he spoke. He still seemed stern with every word he said, but his eyes had softened, harsh judgment slipping away to reveal eyes of despair. To Twilight it was like watching Luna return from the moon, begging Celestia for forgiveness for her actions as Nightmare Moon. Whatever it was that this man had done, it weighed on him greater than anything she could have imagined. "So tell me, girl," the man said. "If you think I must travel with you, what is it that would convince me to listen to you?" Twilight paused for a moment, mulling over the question in her mind. "I have a friend," she said. She was a skilled athlete and horse rider, well trained in shows and displays. Once, she went to a major competition but did not return immediately, and my other friends and I searched for her out of concern. We found her in a small farming village miles away, hiding out because she felt ashamed that she had failed to claim victory in any of the events she participated in. I failed to see how one woman fretting over a horse race is anything." "I'm not finished," Twilight snapped, the man drawing back slightly to let her go on. "Though she was adamant in hiding for the rest of her life, we begged her to return because while it was sad that she had failed to win, it would have been far more devastating had she disappeared from our lives. Now tell me, your followers and those who looked up to you, would they not be in great despair at the idea that their champion is hiding out here and refuses to return because of one failure?" There was another pause, the man regarding her for several moments. "I assure you that it is far more complex," he started. "Then how about this? The Emperor has returned." The man fell silent again, his expression somewhere between surprise and annoyance. Annoyance appeared to win out as he looked back towards the fire. "That would not be the first time I was tricked into thinking so," he said. "The Emperor is gone, whisked away by the tides of the Imperium." "That's where you're wrong." Twilight rose to her feet. "The Emperor has returned, and the Imperium is on the rise again. It will take time, and it will be hard, but I have no doubt that the Emperor will see the Imperium through this. Twilight's brow furrowed again. If you don't believe me, come back to Terra and see for yourself. Speak with the Emperor, and maybe you'll get at least some kind of forgiveness for whatever it is that you did. The man said nothing again, staring into the fire once more. Twilight sighed, slumping her shoulders slightly. Convincing this man was certainly going to be more difficult than convincing Applejack to return to Ponyville, if this was anything to go by. I'll be back in the morning if you want time to think about it, she said finally, turning to walk towards the exit. If you still want to be left alone, I'll do my best to convince the others to leave. She was prepared to leave, then the man spoke. Wait, he said. Twilight turned back, watching as the man held out his hand. If you would please, may I borrow your sword for a moment? Matthias leaned down and picked up Terra's helmet from where it had been resting. It was undamaged, and from the way it had lain on the forest floor she had made sure to set it down carefully. The fact that Terra was now nowhere to be found was another matter entirely. Her tracks lead off into the woods, Nikolai said from further ahead. It doesn't look like she was attacked, though. They are too evenly spaced to indicate flight. So the Empress' favorite student wanders off into the forest and disappears, Naomi started. And you did not have the foresight to keep one of us guarding her at all times? You've known Terra long enough, Matthias shot back. Did you ever think she needed a babysitter in case she decided to wander off? Yes. You're speaking to the wrong people, Lord Matthias, Sister Bianca said. Perhaps she has gone to investigate whatever it was that caught her attention the other day. Perhaps Matthias looked out into the woods. The entire world was still save for the Valhallans and Battle Sisters combing the forest, with nothing to indicate that Terra or any other larger creature had passed through. But losing the Empress' favored student, especially with her power being questioned by the Astartes. If she doesn't obliterate my soul when I provide the report, Matthias thought. I might just be the luckiest man since Commissar Kane. We'll head back to that ravine again, he said, snapping out of his thoughts. If Bianca is right, that is where Terra would be heading. Hopefully she stayed there or is on her way back, or tracking her will be even more difficult. Tracking who? Terra's voice said. All present spun around to find Terra pushing through the brush to their right, a small purple fire in her palm. Oh, I guess I might have stayed out too late. I'm not good with this. Lady Terra. Sister Naomi cried. What in the Empress' name convinced you that wandering out into the night was a safe course of action? Not logic, that's for sure. Terra replied. I thought I heard a voice the other day, so I decided to look for it. And well, I found the raven. Really? Matthias said, pushing away anger and worry for a moment. Where is he? As if to answer Matthias' question, the shadows seemed to bend as a giant of a man dressed in black and silver armor stepped from the darkness. All color drained from Matthias' face, his eyes flickering in surprise and disbelief. That's. Indeed, said Corvus Corax, Primarch of the Raven Guard. Now, young Inquisitor, I would have words with this Empress of yours. Chapter 1.13, Repentance. Celestia massaged her temple for a moment. It was all but impossible for her to get headaches, but now she was certain that she was drifting closer to developing one. No. The representative from the High Lords blinked in surprise for a moment. But Empress, he started. It is a means by which we can increase the prosperity of the Imperium. No. It is a means by which the High Lords can take more control of the Imperium's resources for their own gain, Celestia replied, removing her hand from her temple and straightening up in her seat. The Imperium is already overtaxed as it is, and diverting more resources to ensure the High Lords have their own fleet for the coming crusade is absurd. But then your forces would not be overextended. Had I any faith in your Lord's leadership skills, that would be a valid point. Alas, I do not, and I still see no reason why I should divert funds from building that fleet. Your request is denied. The man stuttered for a moment, his jaw flapping uselessly as he tried to think of the right thing to say to avoid upsetting his god. Finally, he gave up and bowed low, shuffling off into the gloom as the Custodes took their positions once more. Once Celestia was certain she was alone again, she sighed and leaned back in her throne. They need to understand that I am not ready to turn the fate of the Imperium over to them, she said, palming her forehead once more. Why can't they understand? There was a lengthy pause, silence reigning in the throne room save from the shuffling of the Custodes and the Mechanicus adepts working on the Astronomicon. I should have thought better than sending Twilight out, she thought. I could use someone to talk to on a closer level. Celestia was roused from her thoughts as a Custodes approached the throne. Empress, the warrior said. Representatives from the Minotaurs and Imperial Fist chapters have requested to speak to you. What joy! I will speak with them, Celestia said, rising from the throne before continuing. Are there any other outstanding meetings? Inquisitor Matthias Group has returned from their mission. The Custodes said. They will arrive once you are finished with the Astartes. Of course, of course. Celestia nodded. Send in the representatives. The Custodes bowed and departed, Celestia focusing her powers for a moment to get a better sense of the soldiers that approached. The first was the representative from the Imperial Fists, the yellow armor the Space Marine wore clearly visible even in the darkest shadows. Red trim indicated his command over the 3rd Company, and he bore numerous badges of honor such as the Crux Terminus on his left shoulder and the Golden Eagle on his right. The Astartes was bald, revealing a small series of metal studs set in his forehead to indicate service to the Imperium. His companion was much more eye-catching. The Astartes wore a great suit of bronze Terminator armor, his face hidden beneath a plumed helmet. A Guardian spear variant hung from his hip, and his left arm was sheathed in a great storm shield adorned with the red bull of the Minotaurs. He appeared calm, but closer examination revealed slight tension in the Astartes' body, as if he were prepared to lash out at the slightest provocation. Asterion Moloch could intimidate many a foe. Celestia was not among them. Welcome, Celestia said, her voice controlled. I take it that you have come to challenge the claims I have put forth. We have, Moloch said, stopping a good distance from Celestia. It is not every day that a woman comes forth and claims to be the Emperor reborn. It is an unusual situation, Celestia said before looking towards the Imperial Fist, reaching out with her powers. And what do you think, Captain Bremer? Do you take me for a demon seeking to end the Imperium? There was a pause, the Astartes showing discomfort at Celestia knowing his name. It is not impossible. Bremer started. There have been many who have claimed to be the Emperor reborn, many of which have presented quite damning evidence. My brothers need more evidence to prove that you truly are who you say. As if my message were not enough? Celestia asked, her voice growing harsh for a moment. You are all of sound mind, what would you accept as proof to my words? There is little, truly, Moloch said, the chapter master moving to circle Celestia. You possess great power and skill, no doubt, but you come into the Imperial Palace like a common beggar and then suddenly claim divinity. That you did not call your legions to you when you first appeared is also suspicious. But would it not also be suspicious to our enemies that the Astartes were once again assembling? Celestia asked. Would the Imperium be willing to weather such a storm? Especially with your fathers having given up my command to reform the Lords of Terra? That was considered too radical after the generation of Titus passed, Bremer replied. It is the purpose of the Astartes to guard humanity, not rule over it. And with the threats presented in the past millennia we needed all who were ready and able to fight. A fair argument, but you have allowed the corrupt and cowardly to regain control. Celestia turned slightly so she could face both of the Astartes. Is this what my sons have become, that they care more for killing than for the survival of the people they fight for? You are not one to judge our actions, Moloch growled. If you were truly the Emperor, you would understand that too much attention paid to the High Lords would allow our enemies without to close in and damage the Imperium. As if you would be speaking of the enemy within, my friend. Celestia countered. Answer me this, is it by your own volition that you stand before me, or at the insistence of the High Lords that you challenge my authority? The Imperial Fist captain shuffled around for a moment, but the Lord of the Minotaurs quivered with barely controlled anger. What makes you think you have the authority to challenge me in such a way? He asked. I should have the right to know the true motives of my accusers. Celestia replied. If you are truly so confident that I am not who I say I am, why continue to question me? Strike me down and prove to the Imperium that you truly serve them, and are not merely the dogs of the High Lords. Silence reigned in the throne room once more. Celestia fought the urge to chew her lip, perhaps she was goading the Astartes too much, drawing them into a confrontation neither would benefit from. Captain Bremer seemed to be the neutral party in the engagement, and perhaps engaging him would be enough to stem the Space Marines' concerns. Or, I could just show them what I had shown the High Lords, she mused. It worked well enough last time. All parties were prevented from speaking when one of the Custodes approached. Empress, he said, bowing low. The delegation from Inquisitor Matthias has arrived, and they wish to speak with you immediately. I ask that they wait for me to send for them, Celestia said. I explained as much, but the one who walks with them was highly persuasive. Celestia raised an eyebrow at this. The soldier was obviously hiding the full truth from her, but was controlling himself well enough that a simple probe would be futile. Very well. Send them in. The Custodes nodded and disappeared back into the darkness, leaving Celestia alone with the Space Marines once more. With all due respect, Captain Bremer started. I fail to see how the worries of one Inquisitor eclipse the conversation on whether you are who you claim to be. On the contrary, the mission I sent the young Inquisitor on was of utmost importance to the safety of the Imperium, Celestia started. It will only be a momentary distraction, after which we will continue with our discussion. A chance to bring more allies to her side, no doubt, Malak said, but the others paid him no mind. Celestia instead straightened up slightly, preparing for whatever it was Matthias and Twilight had uncovered. Seeing one of her sons walk out of the darkness to her left, though, was something she was not prepared for. His armor was dulled and scratched, his hair a ragged mess that looked as if someone had cut it with a sword, and with his lightning claws and jump pack missing he looked far less imposing than he should have. Still, Celestia nearly choked on her breath as Korax stepped out of the shadows, her hands quivering ever so slightly as the two regarded each other for a moment. "Korax?" she said finally. "You're alive?" "Emperor," the Primarch started. "You're a woman?" "Well, yes," she said. She would have continued further, but her attention was drawn back to the two Astartes gawking at the sight of the returned Primarch. "If you would please excuse us for a moment. I would speak with Lord Korax alone. There is still the matter of leave. Now." Celestia growled, a small bit of her power causing her hair to flare slightly. The Astartes hesitated for a moment, but complied and moved off into the darkness. Celestia could now turn her attention to Korax. A blitz of thoughts and emotions welled over her, and it took a great portion of her will to keep her from stepping forward and pulling the Primarch into a hug. "This is not Equestria," she thought. "The relation between you and the Primarchs is not the same as with you and Luna. Damn it, why did I just push them away?" "Korax," she started, mentally stumbling over what to say next. You look well." "Thank you," Korax replied, still greatly confused. "And you have yet to explain to me why you are a woman." "That is a long story, I am afraid," Celestia replied, some of her confidence returning. "And no, I am quite fond of this form and do not intend to go back." "I would not be the one to question that." Silence reigned again, Celestia tightening her hands a few times before speaking again. "But what happened to you? For 10,000 years I searched for you, yet I could never find you. I thought you had perished, as Dorn had. You forget, Empress, that I was always gifted at hiding myself from the sight of others, even you." Korax's face grew serious. "Which I suppose you did, the first time you returned." "The first time?" Celestia repeated before continuing. "I needed to ascend and defeat the forces of chaos. For that, I am not judging you, but that you would ascend so abruptly." Korax drew closer. "For 10,000 years I waited, looking for some way that I could absolve myself before you, but as you were entombed in the throne there was no way I could see that my actions meant anything. I killed many, traitors and Xenos alike, but not once did I think that the blood I spilled then was enough to make up for my own failings." Celestia wanted to speak, to assure Korax that was not true, but refrained from interrupting the Primarch. "When I heard that you had restored yourself, I did not believe it at first. I thought it was just another lie to lure me into a state of vulnerability. When I learned it was the truth, I rushed to Terra to see for myself and perhaps end my wandering." The Primarch smiled for the briefest of instances, but it vanished almost as soon as it had appeared. "But when I arrived, you were gone. I watched from the shadows as the people of the Imperium rebuilt, but never once did you make any sign of returning. A century passed, and your wardens died, and yet you did not return to us." "It was out of my control, Korax," Celestia explained. "Were I who the Imperium says I am, I could have destroyed the Chaos Gods and returned before they had realized that I was gone, but I am not a true god, and why did you not step up and reveal yourself to the people of the Imperium? Your guidance and wisdom would not be lost to humanity." At this, Korax hesitated. I couldn't," he said. "I could not look upon them, not after what I did." "Korax, if you blame yourself for what happened with those recruits," Celestia started. "They had no choice," Korax cried, his composure breaking for the briefest of instances. "That was a time when a man had a say in his future, when he could choose how to give his life for the Imperium, and I betrayed that choice. I betrayed the very people I swore to defend from the enemies around us, forcing those who could not speak for themselves down a path to destruction and ruin. I still see them, twisted mockeries of all that makes humanity strong, a monument to my arrogance and unwillingness to listen. I do not consider desperation to be synonymous with arrogance." Celestia replied. "Arrogance would be demanding I turn over my secrets when there was nothing to gain but your own glory. And no one should know the full price of arrogance than me, Korax. My brush with death at the hands of Horus was more than enough to let me know I had brought my own downfall." This caused Korax to hesitate again. I suppose there is reason behind your thinking, he said finally. My time alone has given me some perspective on what we did, what you said. But my own sins, he shook his head. Those, I still cannot run from. Celestia paused before speaking, her mind turning over Corax's words several times. It is my forgiveness you seek, is it not? She asked, closing her eyes for a moment. You see your actions as a crime against humanity, and to some extent against my mission. That would also explain why you went into hiding after my ascension. Though I am surprised that you did not learn of my return sooner. I hid myself well, Corax replied. It took a few well-placed words from your student to draw me out. Celestia could not help but smile. See, Twilight, you are already making a meaningful impact on the Imperium. She has a knack for it, Celestia replied. And now you stand before me, asking for forgiveness, Corax. I have never once blamed you for any wrongdoing. Again, Corax seemed confused. But I ignored your warnings. He started. What I did could have happened to any who attempted what you did, Celestia said. Even in my earliest experiments, my results were not as great as I would have hoped. But if it is forgiveness you truly seek, you have found it. Celestia reached out a hand towards him. Will you stand by my side again, one last time? There was a lengthy pause, Corax shifting ever so slightly. Is that it? Corax asked. That is all I need for my redemption? Not every quest for redemption must start with a great task, Celestia said. Sometimes, it begins with but a simple step. Now the question remains, will you accept my offer and take up your title of Primarch once more, or will you not? Corax hesitated for several moments, his eyes darting between Celestia and her hand. Another pause, and he gave his answer. It doesn't usually take this long for her to come to a decision, Twilight mused. Really? Sister Naomi asked. I suppose you would know the Empress better than all of us. When making an important decision, how long is usually? About 5 hours, 27 minutes, and 3 seconds, give or take. Twilight rattled off. It's been 3 days, and no one has come out of the throne room. What are they talking about in there that would keep them busy for 3 days? I am not one to question the Empress' actions, Lady Terra. Naomi replied. Rest now, for it would be best to be prepared for when the Empress does return. Twilight nodded, taking a seat next to the Sister Superior. She tried to think of something, anything, to get her mind off of what Celestia and Corax could be talking about, but nothing could draw her away. Were they talking about that unspeakable thing Corax kept mentioning? Were they talking about her? Twilight buried her head in her arms. Why did she have to keep overthinking these things? Another thought crossed her mind, Twilight raising her head to look at Sister Naomi. The woman was standing at attention, eyes facing straight ahead at least as far as Twilight could tell, being that Naomi was still wearing her helmet. Sister Naomi? Twilight started. Yes, Lady Terra? Naomi replied, still staring forward. Why do you always wear your helmet? There was a lengthy pause, Naomi quivering slightly as Twilight looked on. That she started. That does not matter. Yes it does. Twilight replied. I have gotten to know you and your sisters, and they sing praises about how great of a commander you are. But I can't put a face to the name as long as you keep your helmet on. Twilight smiled. You have nothing to hide from me. I am not hiding anything, Naomi snapped. You're not a very good liar, you know. Twilight replied. Please tell me. It is a personal matter, my lady. Naomi replied. You do not have to trouble yourself with it. Yes, I do. Twilight rose and turned the sister towards her. Whatever it is has affected you, and not exactly in a positive way. I want to help, Naomi, but you can't just drive me away and pretend like nothing's wrong. Twilight frowned before continuing. Why don't you want my help? I am an embarrassment, Naomi said, hanging her head. Were you to see my face, you would understand. I would not be surprised if you withdrew in horror from what you saw. Why? Twilight asked. Naomi paused for a moment, quivering once more. Finally, she sighed and reached to her face, undoing the restraints on her helmet before lifting it from her head. Unlike Sister Bianca, it was easier to tell that Naomi was an older woman. Her face was lined, her hair a steely gray, and her eyes were hard to the point of being unresponsive. But it was the mark on her face that drew Twilight's attention. It dominated most of her right cheek, black scars clashing with the white of her skin. The mark was like that of a flower with blades for petals and thorns running down the stub of a stem. This, Naomi started, is why I keep my face hidden from others. Twilight blinked a few times, unsure of how exactly to proceed. She started. What is it? This is the mark of the bladed lotus, Naomi explained, turning away from Twilight and stepping away. Truly detestable Xenos brand their slaves with this mark to show their ownership. I have another, on my back, but that is more easily concealed than my face. You were a slave? Slavery was all but unheard of in Equestria. It was something that occurred in old tales about diamond dogs and changelings, a horrible act that Twilight never wished on anyone. No, I was not, but had my saviors been less timely, I would have been, Naomi sighed. I was a child on a world far from Terra and the light of the Emperor. The horrors of the galaxy were but stories my mother and grandmother told me to get me to behave, to be a good girl for the rest of the village. But when I was 7, I learned quickly that there really were monsters in the world, and I suppose, angels too. They had attacked at night, just as the last of the village had gone to sleep. Dozens of them, sweeping out of the darkness like ghosts, their cart things hovering on air as they leapt upon their unsuspecting foes. The men of the village stood no chance, their weapons useless against the monster's armor. In 3 minutes, they were all dead. Now, the monsters fell upon the others. Naomi had hid, ducking into one of the cabinets she used to hide from her brothers during play. But the monsters were better hunters than they, and had found her hiding spot far too easily. They were tall, taller than the biggest men and thinner than the most beautiful women, and they were dressed in black and red armor lined with a variety of blades. They took her, just as they took anyone who remained alive after the attack. Naomi shivered, her thin nightgown useless against the cold of night. Around her the village burned, the monsters cackling as they darted away from destroyed houses and barns. The one dragging her paid them no mind, tightening its grip around Naomi's arm as it pulled her towards another collection of monsters. Naomi gave a small whimper as the sharp edges of the monster's gauntlet cut into her skin, a thin line of blood trickling down her arm. A whelp? One monster with 3 arms spat. You bring a whelp back to me? The others were dead, the one dragging Naomi said before shoving her into the mud. This one, though, may serve a use. As a snack, I am sure. The 3-armed one said, drifting forward and leering down at Naomi. She whimpered again, drawing back from the monster as best she could. I'll be good, she whispered. Mama said to be a good girl. I'll be good. Oh, I'm sure. The monster said, its face twisting into a mockery of a smile. Naomi gave a small cry as it took her face in one hand, pushing her head back and forth to inspect her. Tears slipped down Naomi's face, dripping around the monster's hand in small puddles. Pathetic, but there is still plenty to harvest from this girl. The monster withdrew, dropping Naomi back into the mud. Mark her. I know of a few archons who would pay handsomely for a monkey whelp. The 3-armed monster withdrew, and the others moved forward to pin Naomi against the ground. She struggled, trying and failing to free herself as the monsters tore her nightgown away, exposing her fully to the elements around her. Please, she sobbed. I'll be good. Please. Oh, we understand. One monster said as it passed a glowing, flower-shaped tool to one of its fellows. Now be a good monkey whelp, and scream. Naomi had little time to react before they jabbed the tool into her cheek, a similar device stabbing into her back between her shoulders. Naomi had burned her hand once, when she had tried to prove to her mother that she was old enough to handle cooking on her own. It was a sharp pain, but it had dulled after a while and left a bright red mark. The pain she felt now, though, was like her initial burn tenfold. She screamed as her skin burned, her tears turning to steam against the brands. The pain dug under her skin, spreading throughout her body as if every part of her was on fire, stabbing into her body down to her bones. She almost passed out once the monsters withdrew their device. The pain lingered, flaring with each sob that racked her body as her captors inspected their work. Ah, it survived, one said. Put her on the raider with the others. Naomi could not fight anymore, sobbing as the monsters hauled her to her feet. Ahead she could see one of their craft lowering to the ground, a collection of other people prodded forward by the monsters. She did not get closer before one of the monsters had exploded, drenching her in red mist as the headless corpse slumped over in death. The other dropped Naomi and shouted in its strange language, a loud chorus of sounds ripping through the air before it too toppled back dead. Naomi screamed as she scrambled through the mud, throwing her hands over her head in an attempt to shield herself. Out of the fires came a new monster. It was shorter than the others, and though it was dressed in similar black armor, it lacked the sharp edges and blades that the others did. As the shadows parted, Naomi could see it was a white-haired woman, like her grandmother but far younger and prettier. In her right hand was a large gun unlike any Naomi had seen before, and in her left was a sword cloaked in blue lightning. A brilliant red cape swept out behind her, pulled by the wind like a grand war banner. Naomi's crying abated slightly. Whoever this woman was, she was an angel among the monsters, and she would save Naomi. The monsters fired at the angel, small flickers of light forming around her as she strode forward. Soon others joined her, some carrying weapons like hers while others carried bigger ones that breathed fire. The three-armed monster charged the angel, wicked blades sweeping towards the woman's head. The angel brought her weapon up, sparks flying as the two combatants clashed. The rest of the battle faded away. All Naomi could see was the angel and the monster. At times it appeared the monster was winning, but soon the angel pushed it back, pummeling her attacker with a flurry of blows. The monster seemed gleeful at the battle, while the angel's face was one of calm determination. "Do you think to best me, monkey?" The monster hissed as it blocked another blow from the angel. "I was killing your ilk long before your emperor made his first steps into the stars. Fight all you want, but you will know the true meaning of pain once I am finished with you." The woman said nothing, drawing back into a guard position before the monster lunged forward. There was a flash before the monster's right leg exploded, causing it to pitch forward as the angel slammed a heeled boot into its back. "I fear neither pain nor death, for the light of the emperor guides my step," the angel said before reducing the monster's head and arms to nothingness. "Now burn in the hellfire of the warp, Xena's filth." Naomi curled up into a ball, a last attempt to hide from the hell around her. The angel was still out there, but now Naomi just wanted to be left alone. Things would go back to normal, the monsters would go away, the pain would go away, and she would be fine. Her thoughts were dashed by the sound of boots coming to a stop in the mud. "What is this?" the angel asked, Naomi looking up to her. Determination had been replaced with something else, but Naomi could feel her fear fading away as the woman knelt down before her. She flinched slightly as something warm was wrapped around her, and it took her a moment to realize it was the angel's cape. "Don't worry, little sister," the woman said, giving Naomi a smile. "The monsters will not hurt you anymore." "Canoness Diana was like a second mother to me," Naomi said, turning back to Twilight. "She tended to my wounds, taught me everything I know about fighting and leading sisters into battle, everything about the Emperor and his impact on our lives." Naomi closed her eyes. "But for all the kindness she showed me, she could never look past the marks I bore. No one could. So for their sake, and mine, I hid behind steel and faith, and only my devotion to the Emperor shined through." Twilight was silent for several moments, mulling over what Naomi had said. "Why do you hide it?" Twilight asked. Naomi turned towards Twilight, confused. "Why hide?" she repeated. "I am uncertain about how you were raised, but most would consider me a heretic for having a Xena's mark anywhere on my body." "But it wasn't your fault," Twilight pointed out. "You didn't get that mark willingly, and you were only a child." "But I am human," Naomi countered. "I am a sister of battle, the very image of purity and holiness in service to the Emperor. And what would the people see, if one of their heroes bore a blasphemous mark upon her skin? It would create confusion, scorn, mistrust. Do your sisters see you that way?" At this, Naomi paused. "None that live now, at least," Naomi sighed. "Almost all who were in my original batch of recruits have been taken to the Empress side in the warp. These younger ones, Ruth and Judith and Veronica, they say that they understand what had happened, but I know better." "Really?" Twilight asked, frowning. "I don't think you're completely honest with yourself, Naomi. You've treated your very existence as a failure, and you've just shut yourself away from the world around you. Blessed is the mind that is locked from within, for it may never be corrupted from without." Naomi quoted, causing Twilight's frown to deepen. "I really respect your faith," she started. "But there's using it as a shield, and then there's using it to block someone out of your life. I have already exposed myself, faith is but the only shield I have left." There was a lengthy pause, Naomi looking away again as Twilight tried to think of what else to say. "Thank you, for telling me about this," she started. When Naomi said nothing, she continued. "I know it must be hard, and I know I am really trying to understand the world you and your sisters live in, but I don't think hiding yourself away like this is good, for you or the Imperium." She took a step closer and rested a hand on the sister's shoulder, Naomi flinching slightly at her touch. "What happened to you was awful, I won't argue that, but you survived, and look where you stand now, you're a great leader, and your sisters respect you." "I am damaged, Lady Tara," Naomi replied. "Maybe, but not in the ways you think." Twilight turned Naomi towards her. "Maybe you are scarred, and maybe someone might see that as a bad thing, but I don't." She smiled. "I think you and your soul are far more beautiful than you take credit for. Maybe you just need to let that shine through the steel and faith." Naomi blinked in surprise. Absently, her hand reached up and stroked the brand, Twilight backing off as the sister came to terms with what was said. That moment was broken by the other sisters returning, Ruth leading the way. "Sister Naomi, we've completed our inquiry and are returning to our stations," she said, brimming with confidence. That confidence faded once Naomi gave no answer. "Sister Naomi?" Sister Naomi repeated. "She said my soul was beautiful." There was a lengthy pause before Naomi spoke again. "I need to be alone as you were." The sisters had no time to respond before Naomi brushed past them, her hand still placed against her cheek. Another pause passed by before all four sisters looked at Twilight. I just wanted to know why she wore that helmet all the time," Twilight stammered, shying away from the gaze of the sisters. "Please don't be mad at me. I have been trying to get Sister Naomi to open up ever since I learned about the brand," Ruth said, stepping towards Twilight. There was another pause before the sister pulled Twilight into a tight hug. "Thank you. Now, she will know that the Emperor's light shines past even the darkest of Xena's blasphemies." Your Twilight hesitated again, looking to the other sisters before returning the hug. "You're welcome." End of chapter 1.13, Repentance.